setting?
Well, I'm fortunate to have 160 acres here that's immediately adjacent to the Mead Wildlife Management Area. And we're pretty much surrounded by the Mead Wildlife Area. And so my land, I'm able to capitalize on 33,000 acres to benefit wildlife that I have here on my property. And hopefully what things that I'm doing here in managing my property actually augments what's occurring on that state-owned property as well. But on this property we have wolves, bears, otters, beaver, turkeys, deer, ruffed grouse, woodcock. Those are the game species, but then there's just many, many non-game species and really interesting things that are out here on this habitat that we're able to enjoy.
Management.
When we're speaking of wildlife habitat, there's really four elements that we need to consider. That is food, water, shelter, and space. And so from the food perspective, you need to provide all these components that will contain or sustain wildlife throughout the entire year. So you need to have brood habitat, you need to have nestling rearing habitat, you need to have escape cover so they can get away from predators, and you need to have woody protective cover and food to be able to sustain them through the most trying periods of the year, usually the winter. So you need to have that food, water, shelter, and then in addition there's a fourth component, and that is space. By space I'm talking about you need as much of it as you possibly can. A lot of it's dependent upon mobility of the species that you're interested in. Ruffed grouse, they can spend their whole lives in about 40 acres. Your typical white-tailed deer, about 160 acres are needed to sustain a doe for a full year. Bucks, they'll range 3-4 square miles. And so a lot of landowners have this perspective that they can have their 80 acres and have all the deer living on their property, and it's just not the case. You need space, and by that it helps to have cooperatives where you can combine adjacent landowners and properties to get that space component you need for wildlife habitat. I mentioned about wildlife habitat being, space being such an important component, and by having cooperatives you can engage adjacent landowners together, and as a cooperative, a pooled effort, you are able to make wildlife habitat management applications on a much, much broader scale. And I think that's the importance that is there as far as cooperatives. On this human element, we're neighbors. We're talking about neighbors and acting neighborly, working together for finding a benefit, and it can take you to a whole nother level. Teamwork is an important aspect. Probably the most rewarding thing I've done in my professional career is teamwork. And you know what? It applies to your personal life as well. And so you can get landowners together, establish goals and objectives among them, and it can take you really to another level as far as wildlife habitat. There are benefits as far as being in a cooperative as far as economics as well, because a lot of landowners have maybe 40 acres or 80 acres of woodland, and they'd like to do a cut or a timber harvest or something to manage that habitat, and there aren't a lot of loggers that are interested in working in small areas like that with low volumes of timber. But if you can get a variety of cooperators together and pool their lands, once you get up over 1,000 cords or so, then loggers are really going to be interested in it. And you can get that volume of timber by having cooperative working. By that you get kind of economies of scale. You can get loggers interested, you can get higher bid prices, and everybody benefits when you can get larger applications on the land. Well, I got my start early as far as in cooperative work. My dad was always a pretty good neighbor, and because of that we worked and farmed together. I was involved in brandings together with adjacent landowners and farmers, and so it's kind of in my blood, I will say. Right now I'm working on a cooperative project with neighbors on managed forest law, where we have 3 properties, 80, 120, and 35 acres, and we're all interested in managing the property. We've developed management plans, and we've put together that as a bid so that we have 3 landowners that are looking for a bid on our larger property, and I think we're going to get a lot more interest. Professionally, I've been involved in teams and teamwork. It's been one of the most rewarding things that I've done in my career, and I see that kind of rolls over in my professional life as well. And so on this land you see here, I have a private DMAP contract with the Department of Natural Resources, but I applied for a cooperative with the Department of Natural Resources, the Mead Wildlife Area, and I'm working with the Mead as far as the timber harvest that they're conducting on their properties. The easiest way for them to get their timber out is to haul it across my land. And I have no problems with them doing that because I benefit by them manage their property that's adjacent to mine. And so I really am a proponent of cooperative DMAP contracts and just working cooperatively in general in life to reach higher goals. With managing my land for wildlife and our adjacent landowner, the Mead Wildlife Management Area, we both benefit if we're working together in management. I benefit obviously by having 33,000 acres of wildlife habitat around me. I think the Department of Natural Resources and our public benefits by having my land managed as it is because I'm managing habitat to enhance early successional stage wildlife, deer, turkeys, grouse, etc. I also have several wetlands on the property of which I'm managing, and they're open water wetlands, of which something that's a little bit of short supply in this immediate area. So by having open water wetlands here, we have a fair amount of waterfowl use of the area, and that spills over into the adjacent state operated lands. And so I think there's this two-way street. It benefits both groups. I think the first step in thinking about wildlife habitat and management is to establish a set of goals and then from there objectives. By goals, you have to think about what it is you really want with your property. What would you like to see happen on your land? And from there, you can establish measurable objectives. Things that you can actually measure, like I want to increase the number of deer on my property from 20 to 40 deer per square mile. Or I want to increase the number of grouse that I flush in the winter when I walk through from 3 to 10. Those measurements then give you a way of evaluating how effective your management practices have been. But it really starts with planning. Planning is an important step in wildlife habitat management. If you personally establish your own goals, if you know what it is that you want, you can work on then and establish these objectives. And then you can kind of branch out and look at your neighboring properties, establish these cooperatives, and find out what those goals and objectives are of your adjacent landowners, of your neighbors, and work through together. You may find that you have a lot of things in common, and then you can work together on those common goals and objectives. Some examples of wildlife habitat management can be seen right here on my property. If we look behind me, we have an older growth forest, and this is one that's scheduled for a timber harvest to establish some regeneration and set this stage of forest back. If you were to swing your camera around to looking over here, you'll see where 15 years ago we did have a cut in this area, and you can see that aspen stand has regenerated. We now have about a 15-year-old stand of aspen, and there's a lot of blackberry that's coming up underneath that, which provides that real change in structure from what you saw with the old growth area. And we have a very nice edge here, and so you've got edge-loving species where you have that connectivity of two different habitat types. If you spin your camera around further to this side, you'll see that we have a food plot immediately adjacent to an old growth area as well as to a recent newer staged aspen stand. And so what we're providing here is food and a food plot. We have cover from this older stage, and we have both food and cover here in this younger stage cutover. That's the whole idea, is trying to provide diversity and biodiversity on a site, increasing the various options that are available for wildlife, and having them available adjacent to each other so that the animals don't have to move all that far to gain access to different sources of food, water, shelter, and then the space that we have here. Land is always changing. Change is just one of our constants in life, and this land that you see here has changed and has taken on different looks many different times over the years. So at one time this was probably a tamarack bog that was here. Back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, loggers came in, took off all the logs, and then the settlers thought, well, we could maybe make this into an agricultural area, so they tried to farm it. Failed miserably. It came back then, all of this vacant land, it came back as marsh grass. So much of this area around the Mead Wildlife Area that is lower lying, it was big, large expanses of marsh grass. They tried to harvest it as marsh grass hay, but that didn't work either. It kind of is a cold sink here, and just agriculture didn't suit itself very well to this site. So the land was cheap, and the former landowner here was able to buy the property without too great a costs, and he had a different vision. He saw the marsh grass here, and he was interested in managing the land for wildlife, and he was in particular interested in waterfowl, in ducks. He liked ducks. And so Woody got an excavator, and he started making wetlands. He was converting wetlands, I should say, taking these marsh grass areas, and he would excavate out and use that fill to create dikes. And so he held back water in various places. On this property we have 4 flowages, and this is Nina Lake, we call, one of the biggest flowages that we have here. And this is one of those open water areas that really changes the habitat, increases the diversity of the site, and I think really makes it a valuable addition to this complex that's within the Mead Wildlife Management Area. There are a lot of flowages on the north side of the Mead, but not much open water on the south side, with the exception of this. And so we get quite a bit of waterfowl use, ducks and divers, and a lot of puddle ducks that use this habitat, especially in the spring as a stopover for feeding, and then as well in the fall when they're moving and migrating back through. So the previous owner, we know him of him as Woody. Woody was interested in selling off some of his properties in this area. His family had a medical situation with cancer. They had to pay off some massive bills, and Woody did that for his son. He sold off this property to me. I probably couldn't have afforded the land, but we came to a gentleman's agreement that he dropped the price for me by about a third, but he wanted to be able to remain active and have access to the property. He also wanted to have his buddy Jimmy, the fish farmer, to have access to it, because Jimmy was always trapping minnows and moving fish and populating fish in these wetlands. And so that seemed to work. I said, yeah, let's go for it. And a lot of people question that. You're going to let somebody have access to your land all the time? Well, it's been a great cooperative. Woody, this is his baby. He created it, and yet it provided him the opportunity to be able to continue to come back out on the land that he made. And for me, it's been fantastic, because he's been essentially a free caretaker for me, because he's out here every morning at 6 o'clock, driving the dikes, checking out the status of the flow gates, seeing the water levels are proper. He's out here all the time and managing and working on the property at times when I don't have the opportunity to do that. Perhaps someday I'll be able to live here, and I'll be able to do some of that, but right now it's been really nice, this unique cooperative we have going on as far as continuing to manage the land. Land does take time and effort to manage, and so you saw in the background there's an excavator here. We're constantly working on removing beaver dams that are plugging the water runs that we have here. We have a spillway that gets plugged about every other year. We have beavers that tunnel into the dikes. And the dike just about where you're standing blew out 2 years ago. And so this lake was no longer until we refilled that dike. It's just an example of how management is kind of a continuing process. And you're always maintaining and holding, but we have goals to improve this habitat in time as well. So you may have seen cattail marshes out there. I want to manage those cattail marshes to expand the open water spaces. We have a DMAP contract and a plan, and so I'm looking at managing the timber that's here. We have a neighbor that's immediately to the east of us, Jimmy the fish farmer, who just conducted a 20-acre clear cut on his property. And so that's actually changed my mindset as far as what I'm going to do, because I was thinking about doing a clear cut on the property on my own. Well, now Jimmy has done it. If I retain mine in that mixed stage timber stage that it serves as a better travel corridor and for escape cover and bedding cover for deer especially. And we've seen that the deer use of that site has really gone up. I mean, the pellet groups are just scattered on the ground this winter, in part because we had that coppice cut adjacent to it. There's food there, the tops they were feeding on, and then they had immediately adjacent to that, they had cover. And so I think we'll probably shift my management plan a little bit to take advantage and essentially work in cooperation with my neighbors to manage the habitats that's here.